if we are talking about the successfulness of a kid at school, do you believe that it's the teacher who can make the child love the subject or hate the subject, as you were telling about math? Or it's more about the abilities of a kid to learn this or that subject? Why I'm asking, because in Ukraine, I'm sure in the USA as well, people say that some children are more humanitarian, some children are more math, science oriented. So what do you think about this theory?
I think that in a civilized population, any population, that if you simply allow students to learn what their natural gifts are, you are actually hurting your society. Because the goal of getting an education is that you have a broad understanding of the different areas that you need to be able to be successful or function well in that society. If you, let's say that, oh, well, you don't like math, so I'm going to let you...
I hated math at school, the same as you did.
But what happens is, though, researchers have found, if you simply understand enough math to be able to understand mortgages, you are far less likely to default on your mortgage. So let's say we let kids do whatever they want to, and if they don't want to learn math, they don't have to. What that means is you have a population who it's easier to talk them into doing gullible things because they don't understand that there are realistic limits and numbers involved. So they can do things like, oh, sure, I'm going to take out a huge loan to go to college, and I'm going to buy this house that's much more expensive than I can afford, because they don't understand what the real numerical values involved and how that impacts their life. Part of what an education has to do is teach people the foundations of really important knowledge.
Something that will be applicable in their real life. What you are talking about, and the example you gave, is a real thing they will need in their real life. In the Ukrainian system of education, math is not about this at all. Math is a book which you open with a lot of number of exercises that you have to do, and you don't understand the answer for the main question, why? Why should I do that? That's the question that often is in the head of the kid.
And that was the question that was in my head when I was a child, and I said, oh, I hate math, because I could see no real use for math. Now, the problem is, so let's take the skill of riding a bicycle. For a child to ride a bicycle, it's actually quite painful. You've got to you've got to fall down.
Yes.
You've got to get scrapes. You've got to it's actually a hard skill to learn. But children see that, oh, these other children are flying along, and I want to be able to do that. For some fields of knowledge, you have to kind of go through these rough periods, just like that rough period of riding a bicycle. And at first, it can be very difficult for you to see what the use of it is. That's where great teachers make a big difference, because they can help motivate the kids through these times when it seems like math is just useless. I'll never be able to, practically apply this. But a great teacher can help them through it, and then when they get to the advanced enough, they begin to see, this is what math is really used for, and how I can actually love it.
The thing is that teachers love working more with talented children who have their natural abilities to learn math, and are not very enthusiastic about doing something more than to teach kids who don't have those abilities, naturally, I mean. But this is the problem that is probably in every educational system of every country.
And this is where great teachers don't just love seemingly talented children. Great teachers help lift. You can never reach every child, but a great teacher will help reach and lift many more children.
Another problem that maybe this is the problem of the 21st century, if we are talking about some cognitive possibilities of people, that they lose attention and can't focus on more than some time on certain things. I don't remember for sure, but I think that recent British investigations showed that a child of a primary school now can focus not more than 9 seconds. Not more than 9 seconds. So what do you think of that?
I think you have to be very careful because some of the research saying that we have very reduced attention spans is bogus research. If you go look at the sources, it's false.
Okay.
If you look at the very famous writer, Victor Hugo, who wrote Les Miserables, he at least according to legend, would have his servant lock him naked in his study with a pen and pieces of paper so that he would write because he was so distracted by all these other... Distractibility has always been a problem. I do think that social media is often a little bit of addictive. You get those pings of messages, but at the same time, if we taught children simple techniques such as the Pomodoro Technique that helps them to focus their attention and at least for a temporary period of time to learn to not be attracted and use those social media mechanisms, we're really helping kids.
Okay, so you started talking about the thing I wanted to ask you about, and I wanted you to share with our teachers and parents how to teach kids those techniques and which other techniques. Can you tell more about that? Absolutely.
So the Pomodoro Technique was invented by Francesco Cedillo in the 1980s, and he's an Italian, so Pomodoro is Italian for tomato, and he had these wonderful little tomato-shaped timers. But all you do is, first off, to do this technique, you turn off all distractions. So that means, that cell phone, you want to reach for that cell phone. No, you either turn it off or put it in another room. And so it's not going to distract you. And they've found, even if you have your cell phone nearby, it can sometimes be a little distracting.
It can be not a little, it's very distractive, even if I know that it's somewhere there,
Well, putting it in out of sight in a different room actually does really help. But then no pop-ups on your computer. Set a timer for 25 minutes. Then you work as focused as you can for 25 minutes. Now, no one is perfect. When I'm doing it, I'll be like, I'm doing a Pomodoro, and I'll maybe be distracted, but I bring my attention back as soon as I catch that I'm distracted. I work as intently as I can for 25 minutes. No reaching for that phone, no checking my messages. Then when I'm done, 5 minutes of a relaxed mental reward. So
what can be that mental reward? A sweet? A cup of coffee?
Yes. You want to be a little careful, or at least I need to be a little careful about reaching for food. But, that could be, or a cup of coffee. Pet your cat, or listen to a favorite song, maybe dance to your favorite song. One thing, if you want to take 5 minutes of no hard mental activity at all, because what that's doing is that's allowing your hippocampus to offload some of the information you've just learned into long-term memory. If you focus on something right during the break, you'll actually overwrite some of the information you've just worked so hard to learn. So a little bit of mental relaxation for a few minutes it's just the perfect complement that helps you absorb what you've just focused on.
Is it strict with the time? 25 and 5, and then again 25 and 5 minutes. What if it's 30 and 10? Does it work?
Yes, actually, that's a very perceptive question. When Cedillo did his studies, developed this technique, that was in the 80s, and so at that time there wasn't we didn't have the neuroscientific background that we have today. But we know when you even think about something you don't like or don't want to do, it activates a portion of the brain that experiences pain. So the brain, naturally enough, says, well, I'll just change my attention to something more pleasant. And you've just procrastinated. So if you work for 20 minutes, you will get past that pain and into an area where it's actually much more pleasant. So whatever works for you, if you want to go 25 minutes, if you want to go an hour or whatever, 25 minutes is kind of nice because it's a little less than half an hour. And it seems very
here in
doable.
Head, you think, 25 is not half an hour.
Yes. And it's the process of working that is much more important than the goal of working. So you don't want to sit there and think, I'm going to finish this entire homework set now. You want to think, I'm going to do a Pomodoro now. And that will help you just get into the task without focusing on the pain of that task.
One of the things that is very stressful for our kids is the SAT that you have in the USA. Is it called SAT? Yeah, the SAT exam. In Ukraine, it is ZNO. This is an assessment that each kid who graduates from school passes to enter the university. And it's a very stressful period for the children and their families as well. One of the articles in your book is about how to be successful at passing the tests. So which advice can you give to kids and their parents and the teachers, to everybody, because this is the process where everybody is involved, not to be stressed while preparing for the test, and how to prepare more effectively?
Well, first, I think it's important to understand that some stress for the test is a good thing.
Oh, really?
You will actually do better with some stress. So we don't want to have this approach of, we want to take away all your stress, because you won't do as well. So some stress is okay. But there are techniques to help minimize the stress.
Yeah.
First off, just imagine this. If you have not prepared for the test well, you won't do well no matter what techniques you have. So fundamental to doing well on the test is to prepare well. How do you prepare well?
Yeah, can you share some instruments on how to do that?
The most important thing is when you're studying, you want to use something called retrieval practice. What that means is you don't just study the page and then turn the page and study the page and turn the page and study. You study the page, you look away. Can I retrieve that main idea from my own brain? People will think, oh, if I underline it, I'm somehow putting it magically in my head. You're not. Underlining and highlighting is really an ineffective way. If you want to put a little line here and there, but remember, that's telling you that's the key idea, but it's not putting it in your brain. So you might want a little underline, and then, can I recall the key idea? Can I retrieve it from my own brain? Your goal in reading is not to read and reread and underline or even do concept maps, because none of this is as effective as the simple technique of read a page, look away, and see if you can remember the key ideas. Likewise, if you're doing problems, you think, I'm looking at the page. I understand how to do this problem. If you don't see if you can work that problem and retrieve the solution from your own mind, you don't know that problem. What you're really doing is you are constantly giving yourself sort of what we call no-stakes tests. In other words, you're testing yourself, giving yourself tiny little mental challenges that are quite similar to what you'll ultimately encounter on the test. And if you test yourself all the time, you're checking. Do I really know things for the test? Do I really? and you're doing it in a way that is really less stressful. I mean, because you're not on the test. So if you're doing these little tiny tests all the time as you're studying, it can be really helpful, because then when you have the real test, what students get very nervous about is they sit down to the test and they suddenly realize it's not in my long-term memory.
Yeah, they forget everything immediately.
Because they didn't put it in long-term memory when they were studying. So this is why these doing retrieval practice as you're studying is absolutely key. Always see if you can work things yourself. If you're explaining an idea and teaching it to someone else,
I think this is the most effective in my case.
That's retrieval practice. Because think about it. You're teaching someone else. What are you doing? Retrieving the ideas from your own memory.
I remember a trick in your book that you can teach a duck.
Yes.
A duck, that's a good thing, to buy a rubber duck and to teach the duck, or unicorn, or whoever you love.
That's right. And just having a little rubber ducky or whoever and teaching, your friend, even a little squirrel, is just a really great technique. So studying well is at the heart, always checking yourself. Do I really know this? Then, on the actual test day, a very helpful technique is to put your hand on your stomach, and even practice this in the days before the test. Put your hand on your stomach and see, can you breathe deeply enough down there so that you actually lift your hand? Because your tendency when you're scared is to breathe up here, just very shallowly. You're not breathing deep down into your chest. And what happens is you get short of oxygen. You're panicked. You're not breathing deeply. And you think that you're panicked because of the test, but a lot of the panic is because you're not getting enough oxygen in.
It's really connected.
Yes. So breathing deeply, especially in that last minute, they're handing out the test. Your hands get all sweaty. You're so nervous. And just breathing deeply. Another technique is, instead of saying, this test has me so stressed, think, this test has me sort of excited to do my best. And that actually, it's the same sort of chemicals inside you when you're excited as when you're stressed. So if you just reframe it for yourself as, I'm excited to do my best, it can help you calm down a little bit. But remember, a little excitement or stress is actually helpful.
It's a good thing. I don't know if we will include it in the video, but the question that just came into my mind. I remembered myself studying at the university or at school when I had to process within a day a lot of information. And those days I realized that my abilities, my brain works much better if I study every day, not making any breaks. So I was making the analogy between the brain and the muscle. Does it work the same that if you train your brain every day, it also becomes stronger than if you don't do that daily? Like, is there any connection? Does it make any sense? I don't know, it just came into my mind.
Well, it's a little bit similar. So it's sort of similar processes going on with an athlete who is building muscle as a mental athlete.
That's what you were showing it yesterday.
Yes,
at the presentation.
Who is building sort of the equivalent of mental muscle. It's actually neural architecture. And we know that an athlete who is about to compete in a big competition, he didn't stay up late at night cramming for the competition because it takes time to build that muscular structure. But in a similar way, it takes time to build neural structure. And so that's why cramming is not a good way to go.
Can you tell a bit more about building those neurostructures so that people understand how it all works?
So when you have a neuron, you can think of a neuron as being a little bit like a space alien. Mm-hmm. It has 3 legs, and in our example neuron, it has 3 dendrites. So those are kind of like legs. In reality, a neuron can have dozens or even hundreds of dendrites, so legs. On the legs are lots and lots of toes. So, I mean, it's an alien. So if you think of the metaphor for a neuron. Yes. And so it's okay to have lots of little knobs or toes. And so on a real neuron, there are dendritic spines that are analogous to these toes. And then a neuron has an axon. It's like an arm that reaches upwards. So what neurons do is they love to reach their arm out and tickle the toe of the next neuron. So they reach out, they tickle the toe, and what that's actually doing is that's sending a signal from one neuron to the next neuron. Mm-hmm. When you learn anything, you are making connections between neurons in long-term memory. So you learn a vocabulary word in a foreign language. You've just connected some neurons. Now, in my example, I show 5 neurons connecting together as you're learning something. But that's simply an example. In reality, it can be hundreds, thousands of neurons that connect together as you're learning how to say a phrase in a foreign language, how to take a derivative in math, all of these kinds of things. So learning well just means creating a set of links between neurons in long-term memory. And as you practice more, you strengthen those links. And again, this is why retrieval practice is so important, because what retrieval practice does is each time you retrieve, it helps to strengthen those connections so they're very solid when you go to take the test. You might say, well, no, that's just rote practice. It doesn't actually build your flexible thinking, but it does. In fact, research has shown that this kind of retrieval practice, when we're learning, we're actually not so much putting information in our brain. When we really learn something, we learn it by taking it out of our brain. So we get a little faint trace of neurons. But the more we retrieve it from our memory, the more we strengthen those neural connections.
Okay, and if to round all this conversation up, if you can make a conclusion out of your Learning How to Learn course, the whole course, which 3 conclusions will you make? Like maybe those can be advice for those who learn. Which 3 main advice can you give to those who learn?
Retrieval practice. Retrieval practice.
Go for retrieval practice.
That is really, really valuable. And I should point out there's an excellent book called Powerful Teaching by Agarwal and Bain. And so if you're a teacher, that's a good book that will give you lots of practical techniques to use in your classroom. So for example, there's retrieval taking is one of the techniques they talk about. And that is a teacher will teach for a while, students listen, and then you give a few minutes so they can take notes. So first they have to put it in their memory, and then they take notes on it. So
we usually take notes immediately when the teacher is talking.
But then it goes on the paper. It doesn't get processed by the brain. So that, I think, is a really good technique for helping you process what you're hearing instead of just writing it down. But I mean, all joking aside, retrieval practice is really important. But the Pomodoro Technique, it's not really a teaching technique, but it's an excellent learning technique and a way to be more productive in your studies. And even if you're a teacher, for example, one of the hardest things for me is grading. Oh, well, don't worry about grading this big stack. just worry about doing a single Pomodoro at a time, and that can be really helpful. So I think those are two powerful techniques. And the third, I think, is simply the idea that if you don't learn something, like if you see somebody else and they sit down, oh, they read it, they got it, and you're not like that, welcome to the human race. And actually, you can learn better than that person because you're using other circuitry. And all you have to do is focus, do the best you can until you're frustrated. Walk away. Let your background thinking, this other mode of thinking, do some work. When you come back, magically, it will begin to make more sense. And you can learn more deeply than that person who is, oh, got it all. So I think there's hope even for we more average-seeming individuals.
You know that very often we compare ourselves not with ourselves yesterday, but with some other people, with classmates, with colleagues at work, and I think this is one of the issues that we need to figure out and to focus on ourselves and the progress we are making daily.
That's so true, and sometimes though, the very person who says, "Oh yeah, I got it," they actually have the same questions. Secretly, they're going and studying really hard, but they try to make it look like it's really easy when they're struggling with the same difficulties as you are.
Thank you very much for an inspiring conversation. I hope, I don't hope, I'm sure it's very useful for our teachers and parents and everybody who was watching the video.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.